Welcome everybody to the Utah Story Show. My name is Rich Markosian. So today we're talking about the impact that coronavirus has had on the beef and cattle industry. I find this industry to be very interesting because it's one of those things that you go to the Walmart, you go to Costco, you pick up your package of ground beef, and little do the customers know that this product is coming from places from all over the world. Literally, most ground beef has somewhere between 10 to 12 different sources from where that beef comes from. What I'm finding is that the prices for roast steaks, ribs, and briskets are rising. Some of it's becoming more scarce. This is because Tyson Foods and JBS, two of the largest meat packers in the country, closed their operations because they had coronavirus outbreaks. So in this episode, I'm not only examining what's happened because of coronavirus, but I'm examining why the meat packing industry is the way it is, how it got to where it is today, which is really messed up the way it is today because there are 4 meat packers who control 80% of the market for meat processing and meat packaging. And these 4 giant mega international corporations essentially suck profits out of local rural areas and enrich their international shareholders. They do this because they're able to buy up other producers, they're able to conglomerate, and they're able to just totally take over market share. And we're basically seeing the ramifications of that in the coronavirus. So just a little bit, so we're having a Utah State Senator, Scott Sandall, who is a beef rancher, come on the program and talk about it and tell us how we got into this mess that we're in. So just a little bit of background. I used to sell steak for Tyson Foods door to door. I used to just knock on doors and say, hey, I got $5, $6, and $7 cuts of steak. I'm letting go for just $2 each. You want to see what I got? And of course, I'd say, you can't even get a quarter pounder McDonald's for $2. Now, let me run out my truck and show you what I got. And people be like, oh yeah, let me see what you got, dude. And I'd bring out these steaks and I'd show them the marbling and the ribeyes and the T-bones and the cuts. And I'd sell these boxes of steak for like $30 a box. And it was an incredible deal. And it was Tyson Foods who was the distributor of this meat. And I was a wholesale distributor. And I just cleaned up. I did really, really well when I had this job. But then I found out, like, here I was actually selling to people sometimes who had cows. And they started telling me, you know what? I can't even send my cow to the butcher and buy it back from him for the same price that what you're selling to me for. And it really got me thinking, like, how in the world would this person raising a cow in their backyard not be able to basically get a cow sent to the butcher and pay less than what I'm selling them these boxes of meat for? The reason is these meat packaging agencies, they have incredible economies of scale. It's like they process 3,000 to 5,000 head of cattle per day. And they don't just like cut them into sides of beef. They cut them into the final pieces of meat using robots and technology and also a lot of really cheap labor. So Tyson Foods is one of the 4 major processing facilities. The others are Cargill, JBS, and Smithfield, I believe, is the 4th. And what I'm finding is that they are undercutting ranchers. So in Utah, our beef and cattle industry is $1 billion. We have a ton of cattle in Utah. It's a huge industry. It's a huge benefit, or it was a huge benefit for rural Utah communities because beef ranchers could have a lot of land, they could run the cattle, and they could go sell the cattle and make a good amount of money on it. So I've really become interested in not only beef and cattle ranching, but in rural Utah economics, because what we're really finding is that it's becoming more and more difficult for people to live and survive in rural communities unless they're tourism-based or unless they have a product such as cheap land or big forested areas where rich people can come in and buy the land and take over. And so you're seeing a lot of poor people just move to the cities and lose their lifestyle. And I think it's a terrible thing, because the lifestyle of rural communities is something that's been in Utah and the West. It's really been the biggest defining factor of what the West is comprised of. I mean, you think of the West, you think of cowboys and Indians, you think of cattle ranching and mining, you think of like the Western expansion in the United States was basically done because this was grazing land. This was place, this had plenty of beautiful pasture lands where people could run cattle and sheep. And a lot of that's being lost because so much of the profit that used to be earned by cattle ranchers is going to meat processing. So I'm talking to State Senator Scott Sandall about how and why this has happened. So the smaller regional meat processing facilities, could they just not compete with the economy of scale those had?
They can't. They can't compete with the economy of scale. So we gave up kind of a dispersed processing facility and morphed it into a more efficient processing facility, and those regional packers either closed or got absorbed and grew. For example, the plant here in Hiram, Utah, began as one of those 500 head processing facilities. They modernized, they ramped up to about 1,200 head. Then they were absorbed into the Monfort system out of Colorado, which was absorbed into Swift, and then finally JBS bought that out, and now they're just a part of the JBS system, and they run 2,200 head a day on one shift.
Wow. Yeah, and I learned JBS is a multinational corporation out of Brazil, and they have
owned by the Brazilians.
Yeah, a huge operation. And then I also read Smithfield Meats was recently bought out by a Chinese company.
That's correct.
I mean, and it seems to me who's really losing in all this is the rancher, right? Because you're more beholden to what these giant meat processors are willing to pay. Is that right?
The end of the rope, in the whole thing is the farmer and rancher. The packer, in consolidating, has gained a lot of cattle that they know they're going to get every week. It's based on a formula, and the formula is calculated on what this 5-day rolling average is on the cash price, and they've been able to whittle the amount of cash cattle that are traded down to a small enough number that they almost control that price as well, because they know they're going to get the cattle. It's become really apparent over the last 6 months. This kind of whole process started manifesting itself about 2.5 years ago, but we are going to have to do something. Either Department of Justice is looking into if there's been collusion. I'm not sure there has, but they're started a search into that. What we're going to see, if we'll see mandatory more cash sales have to happen as part of the price reporting, whether they'll find some collusion and have to break these back up into more regional packers. I don't know what we're going to see, but we do run the risk of vertical integration in some respects if the packers get a hold of too much control, where they'll just continue to vertically integrate down through the feed yards, and then it's harder to do in the ranches than they did in the pork industry, but that's what they did in the pork industry. Now because those are all confined animals. The beef are more efficient when they're out.
Yeah, and it seems to me, the cattle industry in Utah is almost $1 billion industry, but it seems to me those giant meat packing facilities, they're taking out the majority of the profit, and the profit share is going out overseas to these multinational corporations, and and the big loss is the ranchers are getting so little profit now. Is that a...
we're into a no profit situation right now, and that's a couple of things. The fire that they had in Kansas in the one processing plant shook the industry a little bit, and the packers used it to their advantage to raise the price of wholesale meat and drop the price that they were paying for the cattle that they're getting. COVID, they've even done more of that. If you do just the back of the envelope math, processors are making more on the beef than they're paying for the beef. If they're paying $1,600 for the beef, they're selling that equivalent out the other end at historic. We've never seen these kind of prices for the box beef, but they're selling it out at $3,500.
Wow. I guess my question then becomes that, so, in Utah we've got, I mean, I've done stories about these private ranches where people go in and they shoot their own animal, then they process the game themselves. If there's so many animals that need to be processed, and here are these giant meat packers just dictating whatever price they want for processing, could regulations be loosened so people could process their own beef?
Yeah, and in the COVID situation, the Department of Ag has indicated that they are willing to loosen up regulations. It's quite simply the problem is volume, and to put in a facility that would process a couple of hundred head a day would take $20 million.
Wow!
And if you do that without some security that the regular chain isn't going to come back and just bite you, just make it so it's a fine line. It's a tough line.
Yeah.
This
so
scenario has only happened over the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
Do you invest tens and 20s and 30, 40, maybe even $100 million into a facility that you might get burnt on if and when things get straightened back out?
Yeah.
But you're right. Right now, if you figured what the price last week for a live finished steer going to the packing house, they gave $1.10. So there were a few instances of $1.15 a pound. If you figured what the normal put-through rate would be, the processor could have paid $2.10 a pound and still made money.
Mm-hmm.
So he absorbed pretty much the whole $1,600 that could have gone back through the chain, could have gone back through to the feedlot, to the backgrounder, to the cow-calf guy.
And we're talking about thousands of households in rural Utah who rely on this income for their livelihood, who, want to stay in rural communities, and basically the lifeblood's being sucked out through the loss of the profit margins.
That's right. And the demand is still there, but I think there's a little hope. I think there's some light at the end of the tunnel. I think they got greedy enough that they exposed a horrific thing that they've been able to do, and I'm not alleging collusion, but I do know that there's a pretty good control on how they buy the cattle and what they can pay for and to hold the price that they're paying down for their cattle.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's been exposed, especially with this COVID thing.
Yeah, well, it's at the very least monopolistic. I mean, if they can control the prices of all the different levels through the supply chain, then that's a monopoly by definition, isn't it?
Yeah. I can't argue that.
Yeah. I can see it's a big, big topic, and I can see I just scratched the surface, but it's very fascinating because, I go to these rural areas and I see these communities struggling, and the everybody loves their Walmart and the cheap beef they buy there, but in the end, it's you pay a cost to get cheap beef, and the cost is right now the ranchers are getting really screwed. They're really just not getting and earning enough money, and it's a huge part of Utah cattle ranching, and it's what makes our landscapes beautiful is to see cows out there in pasture, and just want to see it remain viable.
I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we can get something done that kind of shakes this thing loose.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks a lot for your time, Mr. Senator Sandall. Yeah, thanks for being on the show.
Okay.
Hey, bye-bye.
Thanks.
So as we discussed in the episode, what we've come to learn is these giant corporations get bigger and bigger. They gobble up all the smaller producers until they're able to siphon all the profits out of rural towns to a massive extent. And so instead of these dollars staying in the local communities, they're enriching the shareholders in places like Brazil, where JBS is located, or Smithfield Meats, which is owned by China, a Chinese company. And this is how the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy describes it. Particularly since the 2000s, JBS, Tyson Foods, Cargill, and Smithfield are the world's largest meat-producing corporations. JBS alone accounted for over 10 million tons of carcass weight equivalent of meat processing in 2010, surpassing the combined total of the world's top 100 to 20 or 11 to 20 companies. Vertical integration of their supply chains, including product diversification or wholesale and resell, and successful lobbying of governments that in turn negotiate trade and investment deals, ease these companies' access to foreign markets. So the main reason why the status quo is fewer meat processing production facilities is because of the ways the laws are written. To be a meat producer or a meat packaging company, you need tens of millions of dollars. You cannot just do with a cow what you can do with an elk that you kill from the wild. There are so many. There's books and books and books and books of regulations these companies need to follow. There are sanitary conditions all the way down the road. There's all these policies, procedures, guidelines. USDA inspectors basically live in these facilities, constantly checking that these facilities are meeting USDA guidelines. And it's close to impossible for towns to operate their own co-op. That would seem to be what would make the most sense if all of the ranchers just banded together and said, okay, this is our meat production processing facility for Sanpete and Box Elder and Tooele County. As Senator Sandall said, it's upwards of $20 million would be the investment. And then if these bigger operations can come in and just undercut what these smaller operations can do, then they're going to sell out to the bigger operations. So it's a really difficult challenge, especially with the laws written the way they are. These people are giving tons of money to congressional members. That could be another investigation we could conduct. How much money are these giant meat production facilities actually giving to our members of or our senators and our national senators and members of Congress? Because that's really what's maintaining the status quo the way it is. So with that, I also learned that just in the last 6 years, Tyson Foods and JBS have realized over 150% profit growth. I never say that profit is evil or wrong, but when it's coming at the expense of the ranchers, the small ranchers and the farmers, then obviously that's not a good thing. And so, what I think we can do about it is we can start buying meat from producers themselves. start to know some of these producers who actually produce their own product. And with that said, I couldn't imagine a better segue than to tell you about Canyon Meadows grass-fed beef. They are a Utah cattle company, and they are located in Altamont, Utah. And they have a special, amazing ranch where every year they are producing regenerative agriculture. Their grasses are perennials, meaning they come back every single year, and every year they come back thicker, more lush, and more beautiful because they practice what's called intensive cattle grazing. They allow the cows to mow one small area for a few days. Then those cows won't go back to that small area for another 30 to 60 days, and they let the grass recover. And by practicing in that way, they basically mimic what happens at the Serengeti Plains and what used to happen in the Great Plains of the United States, which continually rebuilds topsoil, and it actually sequesters carbon from the environment. It's completely greenhouse friendly. It's carbon reducing. If you want to feel good about the beef you eat, go check out Canyon Meadows grass-fed beef. You can find them at cmrbeef.com. And we have a special offer right now for Utah Stories listeners and watchers. If you mention Utah Stories to them, they'll give you a special discount. All right, and the Utah Stories Show is also brought to you by Diversion Eatery in downtown Salt Lake City. If you want an awesome place to eat at where they're offering curbside delivery, they have burger wraps, burgers, low carb or no carb, entrees, pizzas. Their pizzas are amazing. Go check out Diversion Eatery in Marmalade. They're just minutes from the heart of downtown Salt Lake City. They're a brand new advertiser and sponsor with us, and they're seriously incredible. Everything I've tried on their menu is amazing. And they're practicing social distancing with their restaurant, but curbside delivery is the way to go. If you go or order from them, Google Diversion Eatery, and you'll enjoy the massive flavor you get out of your meal from them. All right, and with that concludes this episode of the Utah Stories program. If you want to support this program, the one way you can do it is by sharing the episode with a few of your friends. The Voice of Local Utah has been in print form for 10 years now, and we've made this digital pivot to online. And we will be printing our May-June issue, and it's going to be our farm/health and wellness issue. It's going to press probably in the next couple of weeks, and you can learn more about what we're doing at Utah Stories, our beer fest, all of our great upcoming content, the guests we have on our program, and especially our deep dives into important issues that affect the quality of life in Utah by going and subscribing to our newsletter. Go visit utahstories.com, and you can check out our newsletter there. And you can also give us a 5-star review on iTunes. Give us a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. That's also very helpful. And of course, subscribe to us on YouTube. But most importantly, if you'll share it with a friend, that's our best way of sharing this podcast and getting the word out about it. So thank you for watching. The Utah Stories Show is produced in part by Connie Lewis. Our technical producer is Tyler Bond, and our publisher of the online content is Golda Hukic Markosian. Thanks for watching. This has been Rich Markosian. I'll see you next time.